Hey guys, welcome to BP the Bible Perspective. I want to do a review and critique of the hit TV series The Chosen, about the life of Jesus. But is it biblical or just another Hollywood film? Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Now, the show was created by Dallas Jenkins, and he is the son of famed author Jerry Jenkins, who is best known for his Left Behind series. He also did the autobiography of Billy Graham and Hank Aaron. On a personal note, he's impacted my life as an author. I really didn't learn how to write until I took his correspondence course, so I'm kind of grateful for Jerry Jenkins. Now, Dallas, of course, then, is a filmmaker, usually of Christian films. Hasn't really made it big until this point. It's probably one of his successful projects, The Chosen. And he chose to do this of the life of Jesus. Now, one of the reasons why I am critiquing this in this way is because of his statements in which he said he wanted to make the most authentic Jesus picture. The most authentic Jesus. Now, coming from that, these are, he has to say that he's going to make his movie or his depiction of Jesus stand out from these past Jesus. And there's kind of a wide range there, going all the way back, and you see the black and white Jesus. I think this one was even, one of those was even when film didn't even have sound. So, black and white with no sound. To the utter absurd Jesus Christ Superstar. And I'm going to talk about one of the other ones, The Last Temptation of Christ, in a moment. But if you notice, these Jesus movies has kind of a common theme of a European nature. In more recent films, you'll see more Middle Eastern looking, because after all, Jesus was born in Jerusalem, not in Europe. But Dallas decided to tackle this project, and as I said, it is a hit show. It is streaming free on YouTube. There are a couple other platforms. I believe one is Peacock, and the other one might be Amazon. I'm not for sure. And eventually, it might even end up on Netflix. I mean, the show is doing very well. But again, my question is it biblical or is it fiction? And I'm only challenging the fact that he said he wanted an authentic Jesus. Now, Dallas himself is as I said, Christian filmmaker. He has made several films before, not as big, and usually sometimes you can almost say, short film. He's done some work for the church he was a part of. One of his 4 features was What If? That was a Christian remake of The Family Man. Now, I'm showing you a pattern here because one of the things about Dallas is that I think he is an awesome filmmaker. When he does a film, it is good in terms of the writing, cinematography. But to be truthful, when I started looking into this, I was quite surprised that where he falls short is content. Now, that's not uncommon to Christian filmmakers and even writers, that their stories, the content of the stories falls short. I don't know what it is that, especially with Christian filmmakers, they just don't know how to make movies with good content. In recent years, they've gotten better, but in general, it's just kind of, you know, I'm just amazed that they don't. Again, they seem like they can't develop good content. Dallas seemed to have a pattern of just kind of copying the world's pattern. I'm going to show you that because I was quite surprised when I began to look into this. I didn't realize just how true this is, but you're going to see this in a moment. Now, as I said, he did this movie. This is a full-length feature here, What If? Now, in order to understand What If, we kind of have to understand this movie. Notice that term, What If? Now, think about that. That's what caught my attention right here. I'm like, oh my God, he even stole the name. Well, maybe not steal the name. Titles you can't steal. But look at this What If? Now, The Family Man, as you can see here, is starring Nicolas Cage and Tia Leone. Came out in 1999, and this was a loose adaptation of It's a Wonderful Life. Now, while the movie was great, I never got the point of it, but anyway, that's what this is. So if you think about this, here is this film that he does, and notice, what if? What if? So basically, almost line for line, What If is a remake of this movie, except Christian themes. That's all. So when Dallas decided that he was going to do The Chosen, I was again surprised. Now, Christians have oftentimes, I think, let me show you something here because I think this is important. Let me go back to my Jesus movies here. Right? Now, the problem with these are Hollywood versions except one. Now, if you look at the picture, Jesus Christ Superstar, and then look to the picture to the right of that. Now, that picture, that Jesus, that it's out of all of those, basically it's the most accurate only because it pretty much just narrates the Gospel of Luke. So they don't really kind of deviate from that. There are no liberties. But the rest of these Jesus films, they're pretty much made up. They're pretty much made up. And it's really, in a sense, it's like they don't even read the Bible, the four Gospels. If you're going to tell the story about Jesus, and then we're going to say, even if you're going to take liberties, all what we know about Jesus comes from the four Gospels, and then subsequently the revelation of the epistles. So if you're going to embark on telling the story, of course, of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and these films, with the exception of the one that I mentioned, pretty much ignore Scripture. Now, unfortunately, Dallas does the same by his own definition. When he decided to do his version of The Chosen or Jesus, this is what he says: 95% of the series is not biblical. But it goes deeper than that. And in part 2, we're going to get into the influences. And it's more disturbing to me for that. But look at this here. I want you to pay attention to this film here. That is called The Last Temptation of Christ. All right? The Last Temptation of Christ. Now, I'm going to come back to this, but this movie probably is the most blasphemous movie. Its filmmaker was Martin Scorsese, and he's probably, this film here is not one of his best films known here, but when he made it, Christians went nuts over it, and it kind of made him more money. Okay. But he decided to do this thing, The Last Temptation of Christ. Now, in this movie here, and the reason why I'm bringing this up here, because I could not help but see the similarities. And I could not help but wonder, man, the ideas or the seeds of the ideas, how close they were to the chosen. I'll get to that in a moment. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because in this movie here, his depiction, The Last Temptation of Christ, when Jesus is on the cross, he goes into this dream stage. And on the cross, he sort of wonders, was it worth it? Is he the chosen one? Did he really have to die? And then he goes into this dream state. And in this dream state, he dreams while he's on the cross, what if he didn't go to the cross? And so what you see right here, and I want you to kind of pay attention to this, because you notice Barbara Hershey, that's the actress, she's playing Mary Magdalene. And as you can see in this other film below, the picture below, her and Jesus gets married. Okay? Now, here's my point for bringing these two up. You see this sort of disproportionate inserting of Mary Magdalene into the narrative that really she doesn't have. But I want you to look at this here. I want you to see something here. Now, notice Martin Scorsese's promo picture, The Last Temptation. Now, I want you to see Dallas. Kind of look at the similarities here, right? I just couldn't help but notice that. But okay. Now, let me say this and let me be clear. The Last Temptation and The Chosen are entirely two different films. The reason why I bring up The Last Temptation in comparison to The Chosen is because in both cases they just decided to make up stuff. They just decided to make it up. And that's the problem here. And Dallas should know better. Martin Scorsese is not a Christian, doesn't claim to be a Christian. Dallas does. And by his own admission, 95% of the material is not biblical. So how are you going to make an authentic Jesus if 95% of your material is not biblical? Now, again, we're going to go a lot deeper into this in part 2. So the idea is that now, what's the purpose then? See, what's the purpose? Right? So when we see this Jesus here, all right, and one of the things he does get right on the film is the setting is more accurate, at least. Although I don't think it was filmed in Israel, but the setting was right. And I think even the characters, a lot of Jewish and Middle Eastern characters, that's nice. Now, let me say this before we go on. Apart from the biblical critique, I'm recommending the TV series. See, I have a guilty pleasure. Remember these shows here? Right? Highway to Heaven, Touched by an Angel, Seventh Heaven. Now, these are all Hollywood productions. So they're supposed to be God-friendly, Christian-friendly, but they're anything but that in terms of biblical. But they're nice, family-friendly, right? You can watch them and you see so-called values. Okay? And the same with a lot of the Jesus movies. In other words, if you watch the Jesus movies, they're nice to watch. And I'm going to tell you that I, as a guilty pleasure, watch Christian films, right? There are Christian films out there that every last one of them. With Christian film industry, not even these are Hollywood productions. What you see here, these two here, these are Hollywood productions. So the production value and writing is better. With Christian TV films and movies, not necessarily Jesus movies, but just with Christian movies, they are horrible in their writing. Now, like I say, in recent time, they've gotten better. My point of saying that is that they're all guilty pleasures to me, though. They're guilty pleasures. I do watch them, even though I'm throwing my house shoes at the screen, I still watch them. So what I'm saying is that when I'm talking about The Chosen here, then it's a guilty pleasure. And if I ask the question again, biblical or fiction, it's a great fiction. And I'm going to even go so far as to say you can watch this show and enjoy it, just divorce yourself from the Bible. By Dallas' own admission, he said 95% is not biblical. But all right, so the writing is good. And let me just say this, Dallas is an awesome filmmaker. In other words, when he does make a movie, it is awesome. His content is kind of questionable, though. And I wish he would choose better content. In other words, hey, with the talent that he has shown, he could make better movies, even better TV series. I'm not saying he shouldn't make The Chosen. The Chosen is a hit. So obviously he's definitely not going to listen to me on this. The Chosen is a hit. It is and by the way, they probably will, I think, run his course. He's shooting for 7 seasons. I think it's about 8 episodes per season. Okay. And he'll probably do that. And the reason why he's going to do that is not because of the Bible. My critique is, again, his statement saying he wanted to portray an authentic Jesus. And how can you do that if by your own admission, 95% of what you're showing is not in the Bible? But okay. All right, so the story, of course, is really told from the eyes of the disciples, okay, the people around him. Problem number one right there, because the gospel isn't told from that perspective. As far as God is concerned, who gives a flip about what we think about Jesus? But the problem is what God has revealed. And that's the biggest failure of The Chosen. In other words, now, I know I'll get into that in part 2, but his defense of why he's making it the way he's making it, I'll save that for part 2. But the biggest failure right here is, you decided to portray a Jesus in your image, what you wanted, and not how God has done that. And that's the same thing with Martin Scorsese did with The Last Temptation of Christ. Now his was, I think he went out of his way to be insulting and blasphemous. I don't know if Dallas himself was meaning to do that. I don't know if Dallas meant to insult. Okay. However, let me just say this, and let me be clear, because I'm contrasting The Last Temptation with the Chosen. They are 2 separate films in 2 separate categories. Martin Scorsese does not claim to be a Christian, and he was not in any way trying to cater with the Christian crowd. In other words, he gave a flip about how the Christians react. In fact, the Christians' reaction actually did him good at the box office. The movie would have flopped had not the Christians reacted to it. Okay? And it was blasphemous. And it did take sacred texts and minimized it. Now, why am I then making a close proximity then with Dallas film? Because when you decide, I'm going to make a movie where 95% of the material is not biblical, you're doing the same thing as he's doing. And this probably can even be more dangerous because people saw it. People saw The Last Temptations for what it was. And most of the people that went to see The Last Temptation of Christ, most of them went out of curiosity. The idea right here with Dallas is that, the chosen here, is that people, and this kind of goes to the bigger problem of Christianity, that a lot of people find this, that they find it enjoyable. And what I'm going to tell you is that, yes, you can enjoy this film if you divorce yourself from the Bible. So the series kind of starts off, I think you see other characters, and Jesus sort of shows up at the end of the first scene here. At the first scene, he shows up. The narrative, and again, I'm going to get to a deeper dive next week, but in part 2, because all of this is important to understand why we see this version of Jesus. And there's going to be some issue of the LDS, Jewish, and Catholic influence on how and why we see this version of Jesus. And one of the things right off that we see is, here is Nicodemus. This is Nicodemus that came to Jesus at night in John chapter 3. And so pretty much the first half of the 3rd chapter of John is Jesus' discourse with Nicodemus. And again, you don't see the biblical narrative in its fullness here. The way the series is sort of toned is that the Romans are the bad guys, that the Romans are persecuting Christianity or Jesus. And in reality, the Jews really enjoyed a lot of freedom under Rome. Rome, certainly they were disgusted with the Jews, but they were tolerant of them at the same time. In fact, you see it throughout. Pilate said it. Later on, you see in the 18th chapter of Acts, when they tried to take Paul before the proconsul, Paul says, "This is about you all's law. See you to it." Same thing with Pilate. Pilate says, "You got a law. Why are you bringing this? You have a law. Go judge them according to your law." The only thing that the Jews couldn't do is to execute. And that's why Pilate had to kind of now oversee it, because they had to get the execution order from Pilate. The way you see the film here is that you see sort of a persecuted Jewish nation, and that wasn't really the case. Now the reason why I'm saying that is because in doing so, the Jews are not the bad guys. Now understand, the Jews are the bad guys. They were the ones who handed Jesus over to Pilate. They plotted. Now, when we say the Jews, we're talking about the Pharisees. And you really don't see that here. You see more a shift. You also see sort of a Catholic flavor as well. Now, and Dallas, in a sense, said that he's consulting the Catholics. Right? And this is why you see that he's consulting Catholics, he's consulting Jewish scholars and LDS people. And so the way he is depicted. So some of the characters, of course, now you get into the background, and what they do is now, and this was probably why the show was such a hit. Okay, so now I got to say, let me divorce myself from the biblical narrative. Let me divorce myself from the biblical narrative. And just say, let's look at if you were making a TV series. So for example, The Walking Dead. Any of you who have seen the TV series The Walking Dead, it became a hit TV series because it wasn't really about zombies. It was it was characters, developed characters. They just happened to live in a zombie world. And one of the things you loved about The Walking Dead is the relationships with the characters. Now, I think Dallas does an excellent job in the writing and developing of the characters. Again, my pet peeve is they just sort of do it outside of the biblical narrative. So you see the background stories of Nicodemus, of Mary Magdalene here, of Mary Magdalene, what's kind of interesting is I've watched the first season. I have not yet watched the second season yet. I usually just binge watch. Again, guilty pleasure of mine. One of the most controversial things that I think Dallas probably it stung enough. I guess the pushback that he got on Mary Magdalene here. One of the strongest of the second season, which I haven't even watched yet, but only reason I know about it is because I watched his response video. And apparently they have an episode where, now her story is, of course, the biblical narrative that she is the most loyal disciple of Jesus. He cast 7 demons out of her, and then she becomes one of his most loyal disciples. So much so, she is the first person Jesus appears to after he is resurrected. Now, what has been long with sort of mix up with Mary Magdalene is that people have thought she was a prostitute. Now, when you read Luke's narrative, you will find that there are just a matter of a chapter where there was a prostitute who anointed Jesus with her hair and he forgives her sins. But Mary is not pictured as a prostitute. She is someone whom he cast 7 demons out of. We don't even have that story recorded. So now the problem, of course, is, to me, this is more Catholic than anything else. But you see the backstory that they develop, which, remember, 95%, in other words, it's all made up. My criticism there is that there is enough backstory that you could have developed from the text itself. Okay. But apparently in one of the season's episodes in the second season, she relapsed. They have her relapsing like an alcoholic or drugs. Now, there's also a lot of modernism projected, meaning it's modern themes projected on the text in this series as well. Which didn't exist, in the first century, right? How they thought about things, how they processed life. The biggest criticism that he was responding was like, he says, well, I take offense that, that you think that no one could relapse. Here's my point, and I'll push back on his, defense of that by saying this. No, I don't think anyone was saying that the possibility of people falling back into sin. Of course, we see that in the biblical text itself with Peter constantly falling back. But you are making this up and inserting this on the text where there is absolutely not one shred of proof that this happened. And why would it happen if she was as you even pictured her? Now, look at this. This is how she is pictured here, which is, again, not biblical, but watch this. You see her with the disciples, right? She's traveling with the disciples. She's the only woman who is traveling with the disciples. Okay? Why would she relapse? right? Jesus set her free. And even as if you were depicting, why would she relapse? But anyway, that's those of you that are caught up on the second season, you would have seen that scene. My point here is that there is a disproportionate insertion of Mary Magdalene into the text, and that rings to me of Catholicism, the Catholic influence here. You also see this is Matthew, and he is pictured as either autism, right, or OCDC, whatever, right? And again, why? Why? I don't know why. You also see, again, Nicodemus is more of a folk hero. He is more of a revered. In fact, there is a Pharisee by the name of Gamaliel who is more respected. In other words, the Bible actually says he is very respected. But they picture kind of Nicodemus as sort of this folk hero there. And again, that's not in the text. That's not a big point to dispute whether or not. But some of the disciples here, now that's just Peter, what they do with Peter and him. Again, it's not the narrative. Like Peter and his brother are gamblers. That he gambled stuff away. And that he couldn't pay taxes, and the way that they kind of wrote that out. So again, my whole point is that I always want to interject the biblical narrative. And to me, it's hard not to, since this is the story about Jesus. So here's what I'm going to say. That I think you can enjoy this series. You can enjoy this series if you divorce yourself from the biblical narrative. It is well written, well filmed, and for that and for that reason you can see why it is a hit. And if you divorce yourself from the biblical narrative, then let me just say this, you will enjoy it. And it is a type of film that once you start watching it, like in my case, that when I binge watch it, that's what I do. I'm binging from the next episode to the next episode. And I will watch the second season, screaming at the, screaming at the screen, screaming at the screen, and how much they just decided not to be biblical. So my answer, biblical or fiction, it is fiction. And I think that and the only reason why, again, that I am taking Dallas to task is because he said he wanted to portray the most authentic Jesus, and he fails at that. He does not do that at all. So if he just said, hey, I'm doing a fictional version, just like when he did his what if, right? He doesn't pretend that that's biblical, the concepts of that. He doesn't pretend that that's biblical right there, right? That's how God operates. He doesn't pretend to do that. Even though this movie is a total ripoff of The Family Man, it didn't need the explanation of that. And by the way, I enjoyed this movie, even though, again, I am double-minded, right? Double-faced, whatever, right? I can enjoy this movie because Christian movies are my guilty pleasures, okay? They are my guilty pleasures. But you didn't need an explanation of this. We knew it was, in a sense, it's not a biblical thing that God doesn't give you this moment here. But when you say, I'm going to make an authentic Jesus, he fails at that. However, you can enjoy the series as a fictional version of Jesus. Guess what? You can enjoy it as a fictional version, better than these Jesus, for sure, better than these Jesus movies, okay? But just not biblical. But it's a great film. All right, guys, look, that is my perspective. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you then.